Eugene here from epicallygeeky.com. So about 2 years ago, my twin boys, Nick and Alex, wanted to be Thomas and Percy for Halloween. I did a little searching online, went to Amazon, and needless to say, I really wasn't impressed with the costumes that I found. As you can see, it's pretty much just a smock that they wear. Not really a lot of fun. So I did some more research online, and I came across Kevin Cooney's website, where he actually shows how to make these really awesome looking costumes. I have a link down in the show notes there, so if you want to check it out, you can click on it down there so you can actually go and see how the costumes are made. So you might be asking yourself, well, if you're not actually going to show us how the costumes are made, what is this video about? And what I'd like to talk to you about in this video is what I've learned over the 2 years that I've actually made these costumes. This was my first attempt at making anything like a costume of any sort, so it was a definite learning experience. And I feel like I've actually picked up a lot of stuff on it, which is the stuff I wouldn't try to share with any other parents out there that might be trying to tackle one of these. One of the first things I've got to definitely tell you about doing this is give yourself time. These took me about 3 weeks to do, probably a total of about 30 man hours to get it done. Doesn't sound like a lot. Granted, I had to work mainly in the evenings after the boys went down to bed, and then on the weekends whenever I had some extra time. So definitely give yourself time. Doing these, granted I was doing 2 of them, so you might be able to get them done a little bit quicker, but definitely give yourself a lot of time. You're going to need drying time, especially for the paint, and especially for the glue as well. The second thing I want to point out is each one of the trains in the Thomas universe is shaped a little bit differently. So depending on which train your little boy or little girl wants to dress up as, they are going to be shaped a little different. As you can see here with Thomas, he has this more squared off boiler that's on the side, whereas Percy is mostly round. So depending on which train you plan on building for your little one, you definitely need to take that into consideration. Now, considering you're mainly going to be building these out of cardboard, I can tell you from experience that wood glue actually works really, really well. Hot glue will definitely get the job done. It is quicker. There's definitely nowhere near as much drying time. And yes, you will need drying time for wood glue. You're also going to need clamps and some of those few other tools that you would usually use if you were working with actual wood. But doing this with cardboard, these have sat up in my attic for an entire year now since they originally wore them. They wore them again for Halloween this year, and it's the small things that I had to fix. There was nothing major. These things are actually put together very well with the wood glue, so I definitely recommend, once again, going back to the first thing I wanted to say about giving yourself time, if you can, use wood glue because they will definitely hold up. As for the paint, you're probably not going to be able to find a spray paint that's the exact color of the engines. You'll find something that's pretty close. Most of the engines are a primary color, so you can find a green or a blue or a red that's going to be close enough to what you need it to be. Definitely use spray paint. You don't want to try to use a paintbrush on cardboard. It's going to absorb it too much. It's going to cause it to get soggy. It'll lose its shape. You definitely want to use a spray paint. That being said, you're also going to want to use at least 1 or 2 coats of primer. I think I actually used 2 coats. A couple of reasons for this. Number one, especially if you're having discoloration on the cardboard, you might go and buy the cardboard. I actually used cardboard boxes that I had from Amazon.com, so this can turn out to be a really cheap project for you. But just find the boxes that are about the size that you need. Once again, Kevin Cooney's website talks about roughly the size that they need to be. But once you find your boxes and get them glued together, go ahead and give it a couple of coatings of primer, especially to cover any logos or anything that's on the box, because you want a nice even color. Once you're done with this thing, you don't want to see anything kind of bleeding through it. That being said, you're also going to want to put a couple of coats of actual paint on here. If you're not familiar with spray painting technique, you always go with a very light coat and then slowly build up on that. I actually use 2 different coats of primer on here and then 2 different coats of paint, and it's not coming off, it's not flaking or anything. It's got a good solid bonding to it. So definitely, once again, because I was working in the evenings, I had plenty of drying time. Basically, I'd work for an hour, hour and a half in the evening, made sure I got most of my spray painting done. If I was doing that evening, or my gluing, then I had the entire day for it to dry before I started working with it again. One other thing to consider is, depending on the boxes that you're using, if you're going to purchase boxes for this, of course they should be pretty clean. There shouldn't be a lot of marks on them. But if you're going to be recycling boxes that you've gotten from, say, Amazon like I did, you're going to have shipping labels. Definitely take those off, because it's going to cause a different texture for the paint, not only, but just the way it's going to look. It's definitely going to stand out. Take those off. Hopefully most of the stickers will come off pretty easy. If they don't come off easy, use some light sandpaper and literally sand it. You are going to get some, it's not going to be perfect. You're going to have a couple of places that are a little marred, because, I mean, face it, you're talking about sanding cardboard. But it's definitely going to look a lot better if you put that extra step of sanding it just a little bit, so that it's got a nice, a little bit more even, a little more toned out feel to the cardboard. Now let's talk about some things I would actually have done differently if I were going to go back and redo this. One of the main things is, once again, granted, I took 3 weeks to do this, but to kind of cut edges for the trim work that you see here, like the red that's on the front, and then the yellow and black for the windows, I actually used construction paper. I measured it, cut it out, and glued it on there. And for the most part, it stuck on fairly well after being up in the attic for about a year. I did have to reattach some of it. If I were going to do this again and had plenty of time, I would have taken the time to actually have masked off those areas and just spray painted them. Yeah, I mean, especially with the trim work going on here, you can see that would probably take quite a bit more time. But in the end, I think it would have been well worth my time. Now, if you're just talking about using this for a year, it may be worth your effort just to go ahead and do the construction paper method. But if you've got the time and you're putting this much work into the costume anyway, go ahead and mask off those areas and paint them. It will definitely come out a little bit better. And if you're planning on reusing them, especially if you're planning on reusing them, you won't have to worry about going back in there and re-gluing those pieces back on. One of the other things I want to point out about using the construction paper is it makes a very weak bonding point. So like you can see up here, like the black areas here on the wheels, once again, that's construction paper. And then the rod that goes across the wheels, because it's glued onto those, it does make a very weak bonding point. So you may have some issues, especially if you're storing it over a year, where you're going to have to go back in there and fix that. You'll also find that it's going to be one of the weaker points that if your little one bumps it or hits into something, that's where you're going to find you having the most issues. One of the biggest things that I learned doing this is glue first, paint later. Like for the wheels, I went ahead and just painted pretty much the entire engine, both the blue and the black that it mostly is, and then afterwards I glued on the wheels. The problem with that is the paint does not cause the glue to bond like it should. Especially after the first year that they were up in the attic, when I got them back down, I had to reattach most of the wheels, and that's because the paint does not, it keeps the glue from bonding like it should. Like I said, this is my first time doing this. If you have done this before and done cardboard and used it for costumes and stuff, you probably already know that. But like I said, first time guy, was using it, didn't know, and I've come to realize it afterwards. So if I were going to go back and do this again, I would go ahead and mask off those areas when I was painting so that the wheels would have a good, clean contact. And I probably would not have had some of the problems that I had with the wheels falling off. One of the other issues that I ran into is after bringing them down out of the attic for a year, is a lot of the construction paper I used for the trim was falling off just due to heat and over time, so I had to reattach it. If you're not going to go with my recommendation of masking off those areas and actually painting them on, and I just thought about this year, I would suggest using the colored duct tape. And that's actually what I've done up here on the top of Thomas's boiler. You can see it is a different color red than the rest of the trim. It's not that big a change, but I'm not going to be worried about this ever coming off again. If I had more time, I would have probably gone back and redone all of the trim with duct tape. Like I said, I originally would have gone back and masked them off and painted them. But if you're going to go a little bit easier way out, you might want to try using duct tape, because you can get it pretty much any color you can think of now. There is some tricks to using duct tape. I'm still learning myself, especially trying to cut long strips. It can kind of get a little wobbly here and there, but it's definitely, in the long run, it'll be a lot easier. It'll definitely stick better. and it'll probably be a lot better long run for your costume, so that you don't have to worry about pieces falling off and having to go back and try to find the same color construction paper again. As for the piston rods, basically for that I just used a wooden yardstick, cut it to the appropriate length, painted it, and then attached it. Going back to what I was saying earlier about paint and construction paper and glue, because it's either attached to a painted surface or construction paper, there's also a weak point. One of the other things that you will run into, especially with putting on wheels, is it may be kind of hard to tell, but the cab of, according to the plans and going with his plans, the cab is actually just a little bit wider. I don't know if you can tell, but there's actually an edge right there. So it's actually a little bit wider than the boiler section of the train. That means whenever you attach this wheel, it's actually going to be kind of at a little bit of an angle. So whenever you do decide to put on the piston rod, it's going to be kind of way off. I definitely suggest using shims, or building it up somehow, because that wooden stake, or the wooden pole is not going to bend very well. It's not going to have that great of contact all the way across. So find a way to kind of shim it behind it so that it gets a nice contact. It will also help keep the wheels on, especially if your little one has a little bit of a tumble. And I'm going to talk about that in just a second. Now for the shoulder straps. I just used a cheap 1-inch nylon strap. I cut a slit here and here, pushed it through, doubled it over, super glued it together, and I mean they're on there really tight. My boys wore these when they were 2. They also wore them when they were 3, and in both cases the shoulder straps are a little bit wide for them, especially the smaller of my 2 boys. He felt like he has to constantly hold on to them so they don't fall off his shoulders. So you may want to make sure when you make this that you put the shoulder straps in a little closer. You may have to leave them kind of out this far if you're going to do a Thomas style engine, but on the back of it you may want to move them in closer. The other thing that we did, at least the first year, was once you put it on them, we used another little cheap strap that kind of goes across the back, kind of like you would think for suspenders. It did help keep it on them so they weren't constantly having to worry about them falling off their shoulders. Now, like I said, I made these for my boys when they were 2, and they wore them again when they were 3, technically 2.5 and 3.5. They're not extremely heavy because, it is mostly cardboard. They probably weigh maybe a pound or 2 at the max. They're really not that heavy. The issue that you will have, though, is they are bulky. So do expect your little one to be extremely slowed down while they're wearing this. They're going to love wearing it, don't get me wrong about that, but they're definitely going to be slowed down. So I think I think both years that we went trick-or-treating with them, they basically made one lap in our one block here in our neighborhood, and that was pretty much it. I mean, they weren't going to go for a long distance anyway, but having to walk with the costume on, they're definitely slowed down. So that could definitely be a good thing, especially if your little one tends to want to dart off. This will slow them down, so you don't have to worry about them running off too much. The other thing is, like I said, they are kind of bulky. They may tumble. Just make sure you tell them go slow, and they should be fine. Both of my boys had an absolute blast in these things, and every neighbor that we came up to just absolutely loved them. But yeah, it's going to slow them down a little bit. Do expect that. Do make sure you have them try it on at least once or twice before you get everything finalized to make sure that the gap here that they actually stand in and the height is going to be okay for them. So, but yeah, they had a lot of fun with these. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed watching the video. I hope you learned something out of it. Like I said, if you decide to take on a project like this or these specific projects, I will have a link to Kevin Cooney's website down below so you can see his step-by-step instructions. I will also have the dimensions of the engines that I built, so you can kind of get a rough estimate of how I built them and how they're differently shaped. If you would please like and share this video. Also make sure to check us out on Facebook, facebook.com/Epically Geeky. You can also check out our main webpage, which is epicallygeeky.com, where we continue to have more interesting content.